Thank you. The American people are becoming more and more aware of disease known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, known as CTE, due to the crisis in the NFL. The NFL, of course, has been trying to sweep this under the rug. Very recently, the Journal of American Medical Association, a premier journal that is peer-reviewed, provided a study that found severe neurological damage in the vast majority of former football players' brains that were donated for research after they developed mental symptoms during life. 87% of all football players' brains showed CTE, but a truly horrible figure of 99% of the brains of NFL players showed CTE. However, the dangers of CTE are not confined to football. Our servicemen and women are subject to similar or oftentimes even worse dangers in the line of duty for the service they provide to our nation. Last year, I was honored to host Dr. Bennett Amalu for the State of the Union. He's the doctor portrayed in the film Concussion, exposing the impact of CTE on professional football players. He began his research covering his own expenses and exposing a cover-up of the suicides of former athletes. However, his research and the research of others is limited by the funding, which is why I'm offering this amendment. Today, we have an opportunity to prevent a similar kind of cover-up among our service agencies. This amendment would dedicate $25 million in funding as part of the Congressional Directed Medical Research Programs to award grants to medical researchers and universities to support early detection of CTE. This amendment would not increase spending, but take the funding already allocated and put some of it, a very small part of it, towards CTE. Every hour, we lose another veteran to suicide. We've made great strides towards supporting PTSD research, but the exposure to IEDs, other blasts, and blows to the head may be doing similar damage, which goes unseen until it's too late. By diagnosing CTE early among service members, perhaps we can begin to change the troubling trend of suicides among our veterans. Now, you may hear arguments today that this amendment is not necessary since DoD already is spending $125 million on TBI research. But this research is on short-term trauma, not on long-term effects of repeated head injuries and what are called subconcussive blows. Service members at risk of CTE may not even have acute trauma. CTE can result from minor events over a long period of time. You may also hear that Congress shouldn't dictate the DoD research, but it's absolutely Congress's role to have input into DoD spending, and there's a huge need that is not being filled. And we already are requiring that they do TBI research as it is. Now, some have suggested, well, there has been some projects funded. Of the $125 million of funding, the amount of money going to CTE projects has been, since 2012, only 5 projects, to a grand total cost of $2.9 million. And not one dime has been spent since 2013. So it's time for us to accept that science is real here. JAMA has just put out a stunning report that suggests that this is a very serious problem, and it's time for us to combat this issue. Creating dedicated grants for the early detection of CTE has the potential to prevent suicide among our service members and will have, I think, a very important impact on how we look at CTE in the future and how we make sure that our service members are properly protected. And with that, I will reserves.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the gentlelady's concern to provide adequate funding for this very important research, and we've spoken about it. I'm a strong supporter of funding for research in this area, and that is why the bill already provides $125 million to award grants for PTSD and traumatic brain injury research, including CTE, which has previously received millions of dollars in research grants under this program. Approving this amendment would create a new research program focused solely on CTE research, and since CTE research is already eligible under the PTSD TBI research program, it's much more appropriate to add funding to the PTSD TBI program rather than create a new research program. Therefore, I oppose the amendment, and I would like to yield 1 minute to Ranking Member Wisloski.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
For yielding, and reluctantly joined with the chair in opposition to the gentlewoman's amendment. Share the chair's concern over the issue raised. However, I don't think the approach is an appropriate one, in that we would carve out another budget line. Given my anticipation that we will not have a 12 full month fiscal year for this money to be spent, I'm very concerned that we will find enough projects for this money to be spent on, and in the meantime they would then be eliminated from the existing line for other possible research. Would look to work with the gentleman to address this issue in a fulsome fashion, but not in this manner. I appreciate the gentlewoman for yielding.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentlelady from California has 30 seconds remaining.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank both my colleagues for their expression of support for the concept of making sure that CTE is studied, and I'm just hopeful that we can guarantee through this amendment that of that $125 million, some portion of it is set aside for CTE research. The fact that only $2.9 million has gone to CTE research since 2012 and not a dime since 2013 makes me worry that it is not a high priority within the department. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Texas.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.